What is going on, everybody? It's me, your host, Nicholas Willard, sitting back, chillaxing on my couch in my new studio. I got about half the shit out of it. It's still crammed full of boxes, but I can sit on the couch, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, I just wanted to get warmed up a little bit here, before we get into the good stuff. So let's just pause for a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, what is up? It is me again. So our listenership has had a huge influx of listeners, but no reviews. Now, what gives? So do me a favor. If you're listening to this right now, please pause the show. Give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And if you feel up to the task, give me a shout, contact me, and I will send you a free sticker for your trouble. All right, that's all I had to say. Now let's get back to the show. So those of you who were paying attention last week may have noticed that there was a point when I was going over the congressional hearing with the UAPs. There was a point where I listed off some examples of some crashed UFOs. And I had listed 2 examples, but then I had talked about 3. Well, I had taken the 3rd example out because I am going to cover it today. So UFO stories, they don't really do it for me. Like, they're cool and I know they're super popular, but there's just something about a UFO story that, when you're outside and you see something in the sky and it's flying around and you don't know what it is, you're like, oh my God, it's a UFO. Wow, I can't believe I'm seeing this. Or, like 99.9% of the time, that is something that is completely explainable. And I feel like that's all UFO stories. But every now and then, you run into one that is just completely mind-boggling. Like today's topic. Now, I had often heard about this Brazilian UFO crash, and I never thought much of it because, it's Brazil. Like, why? I'm not going to pay attention to something that happens in Brazil. I really don't care. Reading about this and watching this great documentary by James Fox called Moment of Contact about this UFO crash in Brazil. And it really got me thinking that when David Rush in the congressional hearings brought up how the government is in possession of, he called them biologics. So when David tells Congress that the government is in possession of biologics, I don't know exactly what he said. This might be what he was talking about. It's crazy. So, obviously, we all know about Roswell and how they supposedly removed alien bodies from, that crash site there in New Mexico. But the thing about Roswell is it happened in I believe the 40s, late 40s, maybe early 50s. And then nobody thought anything of it until, the 70s, the mid 70s. So a lot of what was there was lost. People had to go back and investigate. Clearly 30 years had passed. Almost 40 years had passed in between the event and when people started investigating it. So who really knows what happened at Roswell? However, today's episode happened 20 years ago. A little over 20 years ago. The 1996 Varginha, Brazil UFO crash is definitely one of, if not the most important UFO alien encounter. It involves people seeing this UFO crash. It involves aliens running amok in the street, people dying, dozens, if not hundreds of civilians being involved that were, sworn to secrecy and threatened with their lives. This is an event that I don't even feel prepared enough to cover on today's episode, but I'm gonna try. So yeah, when David Grush talks about the U.S. government being in possession of biologics, alien biologics, I believe this is where he got that idea from. And we will get into how the U.S. is involved towards the end of our story. However, the majority of this tale takes place in Brazil, in the little, I don't want to say little town because it's not a little town. It's a fairly large town, small city of Varginha. So yeah, let's get into it. There's a lot to cover, a lot to go over, and I'm gonna do my best to state the facts to the best of my ability. So, Brazil, widely known as the largest country in South America, home of the world famous festival known as Carnival, and the monumental statue of Jesus Christ known as Christ the Redeemer, that overlooks the city of Rio de Janeiro. We all know exactly what statue I'm talking about. It's huge. You can't miss it. You've definitely seen it. 2/3 of the world's largest river, which is the Amazon, by volume, flow through Brazil's rainforest and empties into the Atlantic Ocean along its northeast coast. Like, Brazil is huge. It's right there. I don't even need to explain where it is. Everyone knows where Brazil is. I found this. I was trying to find, some history of Brazil, and this has nothing to do with aliens, but I did find it quite interesting. Evidence of human habitation in Brazil go back to at least the Upper Paleolithic period, thanks to the discovery of what has been named the Luzia woman, the skeleton of a 20-year-old woman that was discovered in 1974 within the Vermelha cave system at the Lopa Vermelha archaeological site. It was under 40 feet of settlement in the state of Minas Gerais, Bolivia. Brazil is made up of 26 states. Much like the United States is made up of 50 states, Brazil has 26 states as well as a federal district, much like Washington, D.C. So Minas Gerais is one of these states. And it's actually, I included this little bit of this little tidbit of history because it's actually the same state that our story takes place in. So I don't know. I just wanted to include it. I felt like it's not necessarily relevant, but it is interesting. Maybe a UFO crashed 12,000 years ago, and these ancient people, these Luzia women and Luzia men, they also saw maybe not the same UFO, but a UFO from the same aliens. I don't know. Who knows? They might have, because Brazil is known as a UFO hotspot. There's tons of activity has been going on there for decades now. So the bones of this Luzia woman, as well as charcoal found next to the bones, they were dated between 11,243,000 years ago and 11,710,000 years ago, making the Luzia woman one of the oldest humans to be found in the Americas. So she was around 5 feet tall, She had died due to some sort of accident or animal attack. Science would suggest that Luzia's people, a population of Paleo-Indians from Southeast Asia that had most likely migrated down the Pacific coastline in boats, skipping over North America altogether, had settled in Brazil around 11,000 years ago. So that's that. It has nothing to do with aliens. It's just very interesting. I just found it interesting. That was it. So, Varginha, Brazil. It's a medium-sized town. It's actually quite large. Small city located in the state of Minas Gerais, which is the second most populous state in Brazil. So this is when we get into the story. There's a lot of information being thrown around, and I'm gonna try my best to convey everything that I had discovered. And I got a lot of the information from this Moment of Contact documentary by James Fox. And he's put other documentaries out, such as The Phenomenon, I think. Let's see. Let me bring up his filmography. So yeah, James Fox, he's known for several other UFO documentaries, including I Know What I Saw, The Phenomenon, which is supposedly phenomenal. But yeah, James Fox, he's the director of this documentary called Moment of Contact, and that's where I got most of this information from. So our story starts on January 13th, 1996. So a whistleblower from the 6 Comar radio station, which is just like Brazil's, we have NORAD, which watches the skies. They have these Comar stations, which kind of just keep track of what's going on around them. So 6 Comar radio station, as well as Brazilian Air Force, reported that NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and notes keep disappearing, reported that NORAD initially contacted Brazil on the 13th of January, telling them that, or around the 12th or 13th of January, telling them that something was entering the atmosphere and would likely be crashing down to Earth somewhere in southeastern Brazil, most likely in the state of Minas Gerais, near the city of Varginha. Whether they believed it was a spaceship or like a defunct Soviet satellite, nobody really knows. But it's thought that the U.S. government wanted to warn the Brazilian government ahead of time in hopes of cutting some sort of deal, to pick up what was left behind after it had crashed to Earth. Because they knew, obviously the American government, the U.S. government knew they couldn't make it to that location in time to scoop it up before anyone else saw it, So they're just like, well, we'll tell them it's there. We'll tell them it's coming so that they can collect everything, and then we'll send over an airplane full of money and make a trade. That's what's believed. That's not official, but it is official that they warned them that this object was incoming. It's not nobody really knows what the government was thinking, but so it was late. I believe that would have been on the 12th, sometime around the late day on the 12th, like afternoon, maybe early evening. And then that night, early morning of January 13th, 1996, residents of Virginia watched as a long, rounded, cigar-shaped object about the size of a school minibus, like the short buses, slowly fell from the sky. It was trailing, multiple people noted that it was trailing white smoke as it fell, and it looked to be attempting to remain in the sky, but would end up crashing to Earth in a field about 6 miles outside of town. So yeah, and I'll get into it more towards the end, but those who are interested in the story should definitely check out Moment of Contact by, James Fox. So there was this one dude named Carlos de Souza, who was practically at the crash site when it came down. So Carlos, he witnessed the event early morning on January 13th. He was on his way to meet with friends. They were planning to fly, these ultralight planes that day. So he was on the road heading out towards wherever he was going when he saw this object coming down from the sky. And in 1996, he was quoted as saying, "It was floating and slowly losing altitude. It looked like a washing machine struggling, fighting to keep its altitude. The side of it was completely torn and had white smoke coming out. It wasn't black smoke like from a fire. At the time, I thought it was an aircraft in trouble, an airplane, so I decided to follow it." And so white smoke often indicates some sort of issue not caused by fire, something internal, like coolant maybe being burned up in the engine, which is definitely associated with, like blown head gaskets and all this crazy stuff within the internal workings of the engine, and it often leads to overheating and just catastrophic failure. And just a side note, when the white bird came down, North America, this French plane that would have been the first plane to fly nonstop across the Atlantic from Paris to New York. It had flown across the Atlantic, and multiple people recalling seeing an airplane coming in from the Atlantic, trailing white smoke. It was thought that was the white bird, and it had some sort of catastrophic engine failure, which caused it to crash. That's just a side note. There's another interesting story. We had talked about it a while ago with Annette Spaulding. I don't know if you can recall, back to the episode with her discovery of the ghost of Sharon Lake. But yeah, so anyway, sorry, side note. So when James Fox and his team escorted Carlos back to the crash site, in 2021, he told the crew that he watched the cigar-shaped object about the size of a short bus. And I got the short bus description from another couple who had seen the object fly over their farm before Carlos had spotted it. So they had been, inside their farmhouse, and their animals started going wild. They went outside and they saw this object that just flew over their farm as it kept going, and it was clearly the same object as Carlos had seen. It was clearly the same object that had crashed in this field, but I didn't get their names or anything. So yeah, when James Fox and his team escorted Carlos back to the crash site, he told the crew cigar-shaped object was flying towards the road where he was, and then it made a 360-degree turn. But the way he described it in the documentary, it looked like it made a 180-degree turn. So it kind of turned around and started flying backwards, back the way it came, where it then headed. So yeah, so it headed back the way it came, where it looked like it tried, gained a little bit of altitude, but then the engine seemed to suddenly quit and it dove nose first into the ground. So in the documentary Moment of Contact, filmmaker James Fox takes Carlos to the actual crash site. So they're kind of like in the area where they believe, where like the ship crashed, the UFO crashed in this area somewhere. They're driving around, and Carlos was kind of telling them, yeah, it went this way, and it turned around and came back. And then they're like trying to find the actual crash site. And then they find the actual crash site. And they're walking around, this, I don't know, it's just like rolling hills and pastures with grass and, dirt everywhere. And then Carlos, he just yells out, here, here, here. And he's just like continues like, here, it was right here, it was right here. And then he literally breaks down in tears at the site of the original crash site. And it's in the middle of nowhere. Right in the middle of, like these rolling hills and these grassy, dirt pastures spotted with, there's trees here and there, and a long single lane road that's just dug down in the red dirt. So the road is lower than these pastures. So you have to jump up into the pasture. You have to climb up, this little bank to get into these fields, and they're running around, and Carlos is like, it's here, it's right here. This is where, he just keeps yelling here. It's actually a pretty powerful moment within the documentary. He's just like, here, 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 and he's running around. It was pretty powerful. And then so he goes on to tell Fox and his crew, when I arrived at the site, on this very spot, I observed a lot of debris pieces. And when I got out of the car, I immediately smelled ammonia, like rotten eggs, a very strong smell, so strong that I had to cover my nose with the shirt I was wearing. My eyes got watery. And like I said, he had been on his way to fly ultralight planes. So he was, somewhat of an amateur pilot himself. And he had initially thought that this was an airplane coming down. And he wanted to help, whoever survived the crash. So when he got out, he immediately realized this was no plane crash. And it was mainly for the smell associated with this craft that he knew it wasn't an airplane. Also, for the debris that was scattered throughout the field, he said it looked like aluminum and that it was extremely light. But when he picked up a piece and kind of like crumpled it up, he bent it up and he crumpled it, and then he let go of it, and it sprung back to its original form, which was, obviously not like any metal that we have. You can bend metal and it'll spring back to its original form, but he like crumpled it up into a ball, and it just kind of bounced back into its original form. And then he says within minutes the Brazilian military arrived on the scene, and they were coming from the nearby Brazilian Army Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, aka the ESA military base, which is only 18 miles away. Carlos de Souza recalls multiple trucks arriving at the field where the UFO had crashed. They then ordered de Souza to leave at gunpoint. So they were pointing guns at him. They were telling him to go away, go away, go away, get out of here. And this wasn't the only threat de Souza would receive that night. So on his way home, he totally forgets about flying these ultralight planes, and he just wants to go home after what he's witnessed. So on his way home, he stops at a gas station where he is then confronted by a man in black, who exited a black Chevy Impala. And this man in black kind of threatens him and his family to remain quiet. And Carlos would remain quiet for 26 years. He would never return to the site again. And he would never speak. The only interview Carlos ever gave was the one single interview he gave in 1996, just after the UFO crash. And so Carlos would head back to town, back to Varginha, where he remembers several blocks being cordoned off. Residents of these areas were being evacuated, and other residents were being kept from entering, these certain streets. There was no I didn't get like which streets were blocked off or not, but certain areas of Varginha were being, essentially locked down. And then nothing really happens for 7 days. There's the UFO crash, and then everything is kind of silent for 7 days until January 20th, 1996. So there's some major players within this story. Carlos is one of them. So there's 3 coming up right now. I want to talk about them, which takes place about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon. And then I'm going to jump back to that morning. But for now, let's talk about Lilian Silva, Valkyra Silva, and Katia Xavier Andrade. So these 3 girls, Valkyra was 14, Lilian was 16, and Katia was, I forget how old she was. She was like 21 or something like that. She was an older family friend. They were walking home from helping a friend pack up the last of their belongings before moving when they decided to take a shortcut through an empty lot when they spotted something that would change their lives forever. So, afternoon, 3 o'clock, 3:30, January 20th, 1996. Katia Xavier is quoted as saying, "It wasn't a man, it wasn't an animal, it was something different. Now, what it was, I cannot say, I can't describe it." So that's just a quick quote of the events that are about to happen. So they're walking through this empty lot, and that's exactly what it is. It's an empty lot. There's buildings on both sides and just nothing in the middle. And so they're walking through this lot when Valkyra Silva spotted the creature first. They were walking through this empty lot when Valkyra, she sees this, this depiction of something painted on the wall, one of the walls of this alleyway. It's not an alleyway. It is an empty lot. So she sees a depiction of something on this empty lot wall, and she walks over to it. She's ahead of her sister and her friend, and it would turn out Valkyra was only 8 or so feet away from what was essentially a hunched over creature. It was huddled under this wall, not under it, but at the bottom of this wall. It's a pretty tall wall. It's the side of a building. So this creature it was huddled under this wall. Essentially what I believe, no one ever really mentions it, but it sounds like the creature was seeking shade, the shade within this wall. And Valkyra would say, "Guys, look at that," pointing to, whatever was painted on this wall, which then caused the creature to turn around and face them. And when it did, they got a very good look at it. They recalled its skin looking wet, slimy. They said oily, something that's gonna pop up over and over again. This description of skin being oily, almost as though the heat of the day was making it sweat, which they thought was causing it some sort of excruciating pain. They also remember the creature being small with V-shaped feet, having large, very large red eyes, spots on its skin, almost like veins that you could see, that like almost protruded through the skin, as well as 3 large bumps on its head, almost like it was growing horns or something. The creature was shaky or almost wobbly, and the girls believed it to be sick or injured. And they all seemed to make mention to when they made eye contact with the creature, almost like they got some sort of made some sort of psychic connection with it. They all believed it to be in pain or sick and sad. They definitely believed that it was almost more afraid of them than they were of it. It didn't try to attack them or anything. It just kind of stood there looking at them. And then they got scared and ran off. At the time, I don't know, maybe they still are. They were very Catholic. and they believed that they had seen the devil, and they got the hell out of there. But yeah, over and over again, in all these interviews, they bring up how they believe the creature was sick and afraid of them, and that it looked very sick, which is another description that's going to come up over and over again. Describing these creatures as being sick or sickly. But so yeah, after realizing this was something unknown, the three of the girls would then run home, believing they had seen the devil. Later on, Dr. John Mack is a very well-known American psychologist and who investigated psychic connections between abductees and aliens, went to Virginia to interview the three girls. He wanted to know if their description of the creature being scared, sad, and sick were simply assumptions that they had made, or they had received those thoughts as through some kind of psychic message, that they had received when making eye contact with the being. And his conclusions are unknown. He believed that what they saw was real, that they believed what they saw was real. But I couldn't find anywhere where he confirmed that he believed they had made some sort of psychic connection. But he was well known for this. He had definitely spoke. I think he was well known for the aerial school UFO. I don't know what you want to call it, UFO event. And that was when a school in I forget what country in Africa, Zimbabwe maybe. There was a UFO that actually had landed outside of the school that gave, these psychic messages to all these, all the students at the school. And he had gone there and interviewed all these kids at the aerial school. So he was known to do this kind of work, but it's unknown what his findings were. So that was the afternoon, and it's like a well-known story. There's an artist depiction of the creature, which I'll post on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. It's a well-known story. I mean, they were interviewed over and over and over again. And it's definitely one of the major stories within the Vsrginha saga. I don't know what you want to call it. So that happened in the afternoon. And at the time when it happened, it's also, you want to keep in mind that it was sunny out. It was, midday. I believe it was like 3:30, maybe 4 o'clock. And it was right before a storm was about to blow in. And this storm would be one of the biggest storms to ever hit Varginha, in recent memory. But what I want to do is I want to go back to the morning of January 20th, before, the three girls, Valkyra, Lillian, and Katina, saw this creature. I wanted to go back to the morning of January 20th. I do want to mention that we're kind of bouncing from January 13th, which was the date of the crash, to January 20th. However, in between those days, there were dozens and dozens of calls to the fire station where people were seeing mysterious creatures in the woods, and the fire station kind of acts as, they're the ones who get rid of these dangerous, poisonous animals. They capture and relocate. So there's no animal control. It's all done by the fire department, which is also part of the military. So we're going from the afternoon of January 20th to the morning. Now, this is like an unsubstantiated encounter. It's kind of like hearsay. They mention it in some older interviews and some older documentaries that you see on TV. I think one was on the Sci-Fi Channel. But yeah, so this is kind of like, one of the last of the calls that had come into the fire department about these small, mysterious, red-eyed creatures that had been seen in the woods bordering, the town. So So this event was said to have taken place mid-morning on January 20th. So I guess it starts off a little earlier. So at 8 o'clock that morning, a man anonymously calls the Varginha firefighters and says that a weird animal is in the Andre Public Garden. Firefighters don't seem to act very fast, and they arrive about 10 o'clock that morning. This location where 5 civilians have been watching one of the creatures as it slowly made its way down a steep embankment, kind of making its way towards the woods. Some children that were there had even thrown rocks at it to try to get some sort of reaction out of it. But one of the women that was also watching this creature do whatever it was doing kind of put a stop to that. But apparently, as the firefighters are arriving, the military arrived as well. And apparently there was a representative of a Secret Service division of the Army called the S2. He was also on scene as well. And then together, these soldiers, so a couple firefighters, a couple Army members, and this S2 guy, they would climb down a hill, and they kind of corralled the clearly sick creature. So they realized that it was also sick, much like the girls would mention later on that day. And they would eventually use a dog net to capture it. Those who had been watching were then sworn to secrecy as the creature was loaded onto one of the trucks by itself. So apparently, all these soldiers were too afraid to travel with it. There were reports that the military would return to the site later that day and take up to 5 more creatures from the woods, on the opposite side of this embankment. So kind of like where this original creature was heading to. The military would take 5 more of these creatures, and even killing one, shooting it 3 times in the chest with a FAL, an FAL. And anyone who plays Call of Duty knows what that is, or any sort of video game. So yeah, this is like, it's just a report. It's on some sort of let's see, what is it on? It's on some sort of, ancient blog. It's not Reddit, but it's something that's been around for a while. So who knows if it even really happened. But there are names of individuals. Let's see what I can get. They mentioned the name of a 20-year-old student named Hildo Lucio Galvino, as well as a roofer named Henrik Jose, who apparently were on top of a roof nearby, that were able to kind of see, the same thing that these 5 other citizens were watching. And another thing that seems to keep popping up is that these creatures, they're emitting some sort of, horrible smell, a smell of ammonia, or they keep saying ammonia and rotten eggs, but when I think of rotting eggs, I think of sulfur, not necessarily ammonia. When I think of ammonia, I think of like a litter box, or hasn't been cleaned in, I don't know, a week. So they're definitely 2 different smells, but it's something that you hear over and over again throughout this event, is that these creatures were emitting this horrible smell of ammonia and rotting eggs, and that their skin was extremely oily. And the same goes for this one that was caught with the net. It had this horrible smell. Its skin was super oily. And none of these creatures seemed to be fighting back either. So the one that the 3 girls had seen, it didn't do anything. It just kind of looked at them, in fear. They had mentioned how scared it was. The one that the firefighters and Army soldiers had captured, it just kind of, it didn't fight back at all. It just let them capture it. And there was one description here that kind of got my attention. Let's see, I'm gonna read it directly from this blog here. The firefighters capture the creature with a net. It was about 1 meter tall with oily skin, red eyes, and 3 fingers, and emitting a smell of ammonia and emitting a buzzing sound of bees. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to make of that. So it's making a buzzing sound. Is that like a, like, is it like bees or maybe like a purring sound like a cat? Who knows? And I mean, I don't know how much stock you want to put into these encounters either, because they're throwing out a hell of a lot of names. Apparently, this was this operation to capture this creature was ordered by General Sergio Como Lima, and General Lima, he'll pop up towards the end. I got a little something from him as well. So yeah, like I had mentioned, later on that afternoon, around 2:00, more witnesses saw that the soldiers, they had gone into the woods, and they would shoot one of those creatures 3 times, and they would capture up to 4 others, putting them, in these bags, kind of carrying them out like they were captured dogs or cats or something. They have names for these soldiers who would supposedly go into the woods that afternoon as well, but I don't necessarily know if I need to name off all these names. There's like Colonel Olympio Wonderly, Captain Ramirez, Lieutenant Tibero, Major Marcel, Sergeant Pedrosa, and the Secret Service member would be Corporal Civilio, Corporal Sherez, Soldiers Facelo and Malelo, who were military police. So I don't know. I mean, there's sure are a lot of names involved. And I don't know. I just don't know how much stock I want to put into these encounters that involve all these names of these people who haven't been interviewed. We definitely know that the 3 girls, as well as Carlos de Souza, we definitely know they have repeated what they saw over and over again. So that was in the morning, and then around 3:00, the girls see their creature in the empty lot, and then around 6 or 7:00 that evening, it said about 3 hours later, 2 military police officers were driving on a road near the empty lot. That would be the empty lot that the girls saw their creature at. So they were driving near this empty lot when a creature, it very well could have been the same exact creature to be seen by the girls, ran out in front of, their police car. Officer Marco Sherez exited his vehicle and chased the creature down, capturing it barehanded. Officer Sherez and his partner, we'll get into him a little later, then transported the creature to Humanitas Hospital in Varginha. So where this is all taking place is like on the very outskirts of town. And so this officer Marco Sherez, he literally captures the creature barehanded. He like bear hugs it. He wraps it in his jacket, and he's holding it in the police car. And they rush to the hospital. It was reported that the creature left a greasy, sticky residue on the officer's clothes and his skin, as well as, and some reports say that it had scratched him somewhere along his arms. This residue was also incredibly smelly, and when I'm assuming it would enter the scratch on Sherez's skin. Some reports say he was scratched. Some don't mention that at all. Who knows? All we know for sure is that Officer Sherez, Marco Sherez, he literally captured this creature barehanded. Officer Marco Sherez would quickly develop an infection that couldn't be combated. So within several weeks, within a week, he was sick. Within several weeks, he was very sick. He never told the doctors about the event with the slimy creature, believing he would get better, as well as, he had been ordered to secrecy, not to mention what had happened, not to mention the creature. But as he realized he wasn't going to pull through, he told his sister that he had been involved in an incredible event. He still didn't want to tell her everything that went down, but he told her enough that she knew something had happened within the military, and that it was most likely her brother was dying. So Marco would die from this infection in early February. Doctors would tell his family that an autopsy wasn't needed, and that even though everything was quote unquote fine, his body should be buried as soon as possible, which is clearly fishy. Something had happened to him. I, as well as everybody else who has investigated this, believes it has something to do with that oily residue that on these creatures' skin, and that some sort of space disease got in his system and killed him. His sister, Marta, so you have Marco and Marta, she would end up getting his death report after paying an extremely ridiculous amount of money for it, and would find that even though multiple pages were missing, the doctors did find an unknown toxic substance within his body, which was obviously whatever that slimy, oily shit is that was all over these alien creatures. Fox and his team would attempt to contact Eric Lopes, who was Marco's partner and the only other individual with Marco that night. However, Eric refused to talk and even threatened them, telling them to leave or he would shoot them. So they weren't able to talk to him. This Eric Lopes guy has never came forward with any sort of statement or story, or so he's kind of an unknown. So that would all happen throughout the day on January 20th. Now, I think on the night, later that night or early morning, January 21st, there's like a bunch of random accounts of things that goes on. So I'm going to start with, in the documentary, a radiologist told Fox and his team that a military convoy pulled up to his hospital and brought in a black body bag. The military personnel then told him to x-ray the deceased's head, cervical spine, torso, and his arms and legs, all from within the bag. He was then sworn to secrecy, told not to talk about what had just happened. They would not let him look at any of the pictures he had taken or within the bag, and that was that. And then they would talk with an anonymous individual who worked for the military that they referred to as a man named Military X. This would be the first time he was coming forward. He would tell the crew that he was involved in transporting the body of a creature, much like the one brought in by Marco, to the nearby Isa army base, military base. Military X recalls being ordered to prep some vehicles for a mission, where he would then follow some unmarked trucks into the city. They stopped in Varginha for a while. This is where he realized the unmarked trucks belonged to the Army's Secret Service, which was the S2. We had talked earlier about some of these random S2 agents being with, some of these military soldiers, these Army soldiers. They were then given the order to back, and they were taking orders from these S2 agents. So they were given orders to back the trucks into the Humanitas hospital. He, for some reason, enters the building with the S2 guys and goes to a room with several other soldiers and doctors studying something in a box that was, I think he said it was a wooden box on top of, one of these stainless steel examination tables. This military X remembers he remembers an army soldier filming what was going on, and then at one point the soldier filming stops. He's like he's so he's so shocked by what he's filming, he just kind of stops and lets the camera hang at his side. He remembers doctors and military officials analyzing the body of a dead creature that they had. So it was a stainless steel box atop an examination table. So they had the creature inside this box. And in the documentary, it shows the creature's head and torso covered with, some sort of sheet, but its legs were sticking out. And then Military X states, it looked like they all seemed scared of it. And when I looked, I saw something different, a different creature with skin very oily, a lot of oil, like silicone. Seeing that, I got scared. Military X also makes reference to the being's foot and the unique V shape that it made, knowing it wasn't human so he knew it wasn't human after seeing its foot. And he references the foot by doing the Vulcan salute. He says it was like this, and he holds his hand up in a V shape. So he kind of, the Vulcan salute, practically two fingers. What led me to believe this wasn't a human being was the foot, he says. He's then kicked out of the hospital room, sent back to the trucks, and where they would then transport the creature to the ESA base. His superiors end up calling him in to one of their offices where there's he says there's a bunch of random officers and within this room, I guess. And they're all kind of looking at him funny. He remains silent, and they ask him some, what did you see? And blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't know if he should lie or tell the truth. And I forget what he says, but then, his commanding officer says, tells him that what he saw was supernatural and that he can't ever talk about it, or, and, kind of like what they've said to everyone else who has seen one of these creatures. And then apparently early, before that creature had arrived at the hospital, apparently it had been transported. So there's a bunch of, these random accounts from all these random people. And apparently the creature had been transported to the ESA military base, the ESA army base, and had been alive. And it was quickly realized that the base didn't have the medical equipment needed to keep this alien creature alive. So they transported it to the regional hospital, which also was unequipped to handle this creature. And then that was when it was brought to the Humanitas hospital, where Military X would pick it up and bring it back to the ESA army base. These creatures were said to have claws that were supposedly sharp enough to slice through a wooden table like butter. They had talons on their toes that were, I guess, extremely sharp, but it didn't seem like they were using them as weapons. And the night of January 20th, morning of the 21st, was just marked by an influx of UFO sightings and encounters. There were just dozens and dozens of people saying they had seen UFOs flying around. They had seen more of these creatures running around. People thought that it was some sort of alien invasion going on. They weren't sure. Nobody really knew what seemed to be going on. And there's one interesting account from the 21st, the night of the 21st. There was a woman attending a party at the Virginia Zoo. She went out to smoke a cigarette on this downstairs balcony, like a deck. And then she saw the head and neck of a creature that popped up above the balcony railing. The first thing that caught her attention were its big red eyes. But unlike, most of all of the creatures that had been seen throughout Virginia, they all had big red eyes. That was the first thing everybody had noticed, these big red eyes. However, this one, she says, was wearing some sort of golden helmet on its head, and this would be the first creature reported wearing any sort of helmet or whatever it was. So around this time, multiple animals would turn up dead throughout the zoo, and they were thought to have been poisoned by an unknown toxin, just like Officer Marco. So a former Brazilian Air Force traffic controller claims that on January 22nd, the United States Air Force landed unannounced without the proper authorization in Campinas, a city in the neighboring state of Sao Paulo. They then sent out 2 helicopters to Varginha and collected something, brought it back to Campinas, landed, and then loaded everything into a C-7 transport plane and then left. Rumor is the U.S. agents collected bodies, both dead and alive, of these creatures that had been captured throughout the last couple days, as well as all the crash debris. It's believed by many investigators that, a secret sect of U.S. officials were able to strike a deal with the Brazilian government so that the U.S. would be able to collect all the evidence and the bits of this flexible metal. And I think it's believed that there were at least 8 creatures that were captured, and up to 3 of them were reported dead, and 5 were still alive. And so these would be the biologics David Grush had told Congress about. This is where this comes in. It's just, I don't know, maybe we did get some from Area 51. Who knows? But this encounter is this UFO event is it's so fresh that these alien creatures that were captured alive, I mean, they could still be alive today. So that was pretty much the Varginha incident. It mostly happens on the 20th and the 21st, but it takes place over, from the 13th through the 20th, 21st, and 22nd, when the U.S. government shows up to take everything. So apparently a couple little things happen. Apparently Luzia, mother of the 2 girls who had seen the alien, the 2 sisters, she was met at the door one night by 4 men in crisp pressed white Armani suits who offered her $20,000 if she could convince her daughters to publicly state their contact with the alien was nothing but a joke. She would refuse the money, stating she wouldn't force her daughters to lie. They would try to offer more money and she would refuse. They would threaten her and say they'd be back, but they would never return. James Fox says that there's a 35-second video, which is most likely video taken by the military, either from when Military X was there and they were filming the dead, the dead body of that creature at the hospital, or there's also some shady reference of video made from one of these creatures refusing to eat or drink, this fruit and water that was offered to it by the military. So, but he states that this video has already made its rounds around Capitol Hill, behind closed doors, of course, but that hopefully it will be released soon. Who knows when that'll be, if it will be at all. There was a couple interesting quotes. And so here's the aftermath, the events that, the cover up involved, some quotes that I found interesting. So this quote was in the documentary, and it's It was said by retired Brazilian Air Force General Huos Carlos Pereira, tells filmmaker James Fox in his documentary Moment of Contact that governments tend to cover up everything they can't explain to their population. Obviously that's an interesting quote, especially since he was a general in the Air Force, deep in the military. I'm sure he knows plenty of things that were covered up. So in 2010, the Brazilian government, in the form of its military, would start an official inquiry into the girls' sighting, and they would come to a much different conclusion. They would conclude that the girls had come across a little homeless man that was called Little Louis. This man supposedly had unique features that matched the girl's description, and he was, said to be mentally unstable and most likely very dirty due to the heavy rains that had gone on. It's fact that the girls had seen this creature before the huge storm that would roll in that night. And they made reference multiple times that they knew who Little Louis was, and it definitely was not Little Louis. The military would also say that they had to transfer an exhumed body of a young man who was the son of a well-to-do politician who had died and been buried unexpectedly in his cell after being arrested for theft. So he had been arrested and then died, and then before they could like parents or anything could see the body or whatever, they had buried this man. So they had to they had to exhume his body so that the family could get an autopsy done. It was later discovered that this incident had happened a week after the Varginha event. They had also attributed the sudden military presence as nothing more than routine training, and stated that the aliens seen within the hospital were nothing more than a couple with dwarfism who were about to have a baby. So they were expecting, they were at the hospital, the man's wife about to give birth, and that everyone thought that these dwarves were the aliens. And on May 8th, General Lima, we'd mentioned him earlier, he had ordered the killing of one of those creatures and the capturing of 5 others. On May 8th, General Lima holds a press conference, and as he's walking out, a reporter asks, "What were you doing that day?" And General Lima says, "We were working for the army and for the nation." The reporter then says, "Can you prove it?" General Lima says, "Prove to whom?" The reporter then says, "To the press." General Lima replies, "Why?" The reporter says, "Don't you want to prove the facts you just said?" General Lima says, "I don't have to prove what I said. I've already said everything I'm going to say." And then he walks out. And that was it. That was the only information that he would give on the events that had transpired between January 13th, 1996 and January 22nd, 1996. Now let's see here. I have a book. Let's see if I can dig it up really quick. It's an old book. The World of the Unknown, UFOs. I believe I had rented this book from the library back in elementary school and never gave it back. It's from 1977. It's just a book of UFOs in history and UFOs all over the world. Close encounters. Sorry, I'm trying to find a certain event. Encounters in space. Odd aircraft. UFOs on the screen. Hunting and faking. mistaken identity, life in outer space. Here we go. UFO knots, encounters of the third kind. The tiny goblin creature on the right was one of 5 apparently seen in 1955 by a farming family in Kentucky. When the farmers shot at it, they heard a metallic sound, but the creature seemed unhurt. A few minutes later, it peered through one of the farmhouse windows, and when one of the farmers ventured outside, a silvery hand inquisitively brushed the man's hair. The creature became known as the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblin. When I heard of the Varginha creatures, and what they looked like, they were short. They had big red eyes, long arms, short legs, short little torsos, brown skin. I instantly thought of these Hopkinsville goblins, which almost match the description of the Varginha creatures, except for the red eyes. And these goblins, they had pointy ears, and no one had ever mentioned anything about the ears of these creatures. But I don't know, I wanted to read that. I thought that it was very interesting. Piqued my interest. I instantly thought of that little encounter. But yeah, that is the Varginha, Brazil UFO encounter of 1996. It's definitely seen as one of, if not the most important encounter with a UFO, as well as a EBE, an extraterrestrial biologic entity. And it's most likely the prime example David Grush would have given to the members of the congressional hearing, when he had told them that the United States government is in possession of extraterrestrial biologics. So I'm sure there's other UFO encounters out there where we may have received bodies of the pilots or creatures that were involved. There's, like I said, there's Roswell. But who really knows what we got out of there? It's just happened so long ago, and there's such a huge gap in between investigating it that I think it's hard to tell what really went on there. But this Vsrginha incident happened in 1996. Like, that was, I was 6 years old then. I was almost 6 years old at that point. It's just, it wasn't that long ago. These creatures could still be alive, and just it definitely reinvigorated my attitude towards these UFO encounters. It's just nothing that really ever interested me. Like, I believe there's aliens out there. I just don't you never hear about any of these really cool encounters. I feel like all you really hear about are, this person saw this or this person saw that. So I was happy to really find out what the Vsrginha incident was about. And I'm damn sure that we still have at least the corpses of these creatures on ice somewhere. And that definitely sounds almost canon to me.